Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. What's shaking out there? Quite an amazing weekend here in the desert. Las Vegas played host to a Formula One race, actually several days of events leading up to the race itself, following months of closed roads and orange cones. A lot of headaches for locals to grumble about, then some issues with the track itself, topped off by pretty bad weather. But the race happened. Tens of thousands of visitors were heading out of town today, or trying to, when a major windstorm descended on the Mojave, strong enough to shut down the Harry Reid Airport at the worst possible moment. Dust storms were so severe they closed the I-15 between Las Vegas and L.A. A huge caravan of traffic came to a halt for hours and hours. I mean, that drive, if you've ever made it, that can be challenging on any given day, especially Sunday, but for a huge event like this, quite a mess. Really hope most visitors who came for it still had a good time. The wind is not our fault. Starting to feel like winter just around the corner here. It's cold outside tonight, and the wind is still whipping around. Not a good night to be outdoors. The mint that grows in my little mantis sanctuary at home here, it's withering. Flowers are all gone. So are the mantises who live there. They're done for the year, I guess, hoping we'll see their offspring come May 1st or so. Perhaps you heard the news today that former First Lady Rosalind Carter passed away. She was a classy lady, 96 years old, did a lot of work on mental health issues. She formally entered hospice care at her home days ago. Her husband, the former president, has been in hospice care there for months, but is still hanging on. The Carters were happily married for 77 years, which is amazing. Couples who are married that long, when one of them goes, the other often soon follows. There was one heck of a UFO-themed get-together this weekend. Dr. Gary Nolan of Stanford was one of the main organizers of the Soul Foundation, SOL, that is, Foundation. This get-together, which featured some of the top people in the history of the topic. I think the audience was probably just as interesting as the listed speakers. Lots of names we all know from this program. No cameras or recorded were allowed, so we'll likely be hearing reports from attendees over the next couple of days or so. And from what I've read on social media, there were some encouraging words dropped about what might come next. Controlled disclosure, some predicted. I hope so, but I'll believe it when I see it. We have two guests tonight who can provide unique perspectives on the history of, and perhaps the future of, UFO knowledge and disclosure, encounters with non-human intelligence, where this stuff might be heading. It isn't too often we get to hear from a Ph.D. scientist with impeccable credentials who steps forward for the first time to admit he's had a lifetime of close encounter experiences. I mean, why do that? It's an invitation to professional trouble and ridicule, right? My first guest tonight, Dr. Bruce Rapuano, earned a Ph.D. in neuropharmacology. He's worked in biomedical research at distinguished medical institutions. He's also had time to earn a law degree, but he's harbored a shocking secret all of his life, a series of bizarre, up-close and personal encounters with non-human entities. He decided to come clean about it and has written a fascinating book that goes way beyond what other alien abduction exposés have covered. Bruce takes a deep dive into the technology involved and what the ultimate goals might be, and it's not always a pretty scenario. He joins me minutes from now. Then in the second half, writer Mark Hartzman is here to talk about his sweeping examination of UFOs and ETs, the history of this phenomena, the politics involved, what all of this says about us, our hopes and fears and fantasies. His book is called, appropriately enough, We Are Not Alone, and it's really solid overview of a complex topic, very entertaining. We have snippets of a recorded interview that Mark recorded a month or so ago on Coast, but we wanted to speak with him live on a broader range of topics he's covered, so that starts 2 hours from now. Webmaster Lex Lonehood and I put together our usual assortment of items and oddities culled from news media around the world. We call it Knapp's News, and this time Lex had the help of a new member of our team, Jeremy Wells. Among the items we cover this week, did you read anything about this new theory on a second Big Bang? It's an attempt by science to imagine where all that missing dark matter originated and where it went, how it came into being, why we can't find it. It's an intriguing idea that has physicists chattering this week. There's also a story about how studying the language of whales might help us to one day connect with ETs, assuming there are any of them out there, that is. What about planet-killing asteroids? Can we come up with a way to make sure that we see them coming? Well, not so far. It's not an encouraging story, but I'm glad someone's at least thinking about it, because a couple of pretty big chunks of space rocks have caught us totally off guard in recent years. Someone at the Denver airport has a heck of a sense of humor. There's a Snopes story that confirms a talking gargoyle has been installed at the airport, and it directly addresses and has fun with some of the wild tales that we've all heard about that airport in a pretty humorous way. We have that story, plus one about an ancient image of a lion carved in a place where no lions ever lived. How did that happen? How did it get there? That and more in Knapp's News. While you're on the website, check out how to become a Coast Insider. The cost is about 15 cents a day. If you subscribe for a year, gives you access to a huge archive of programs and interviews, including the Art Bell Vault. You can listen anytime you want, as often as you want. It's a great deal. So, too, is a subscription to Beyond Belief. That's George Norrie's television program, in which George interviewed his fascinating guests on topics similar to what he does so well here on the radio. With that, let's assume the position. Bring in the dog and the cat and the pet turkey that presumably will still be with us after the holiday coming this week. Put on a pot of joe, slide your bod into those warm flannel jammies and your toes into your best bunny slippers. Plop yourself down in a comfy spot, turn down the lights, and turn up the radio. In a moment, Dr. Bruce Rapuano shares intimate details about his lifetime of close encounters. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Bruce Rapuano received a B.A. degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he majored in neurobiology and minored in psychology. He got a Ph.D. in neuropharmacology from the University of Connecticut, and I guess in his spare time got a J.D., that meaning a law degree, from New York Law School. Dr. Rapuano has conducted independent biomedical research as a cell biologist at internationally recognized medical institutions, including Sloan Kettering and the Hospital for Special Surgery, both in New York City. He has authored or co-authored 30 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals. His book, Dominion Lost, just published, is fantastic. He's making his very first appearance tonight on Coast to Coast. Bruce, welcome.
Mr. George Knapp, it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you, and of course to be on the historic Coast to Coast.
Well, look,
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I couldn't wait to talk to you. It sounds like you have a pretty good life. Advanced degrees in biology, a career as a medical researcher. You got a law degree, I guess, in your spare time. You have to know how this...
I wanted to keep busy.
Yeah, I guess so. But you have to know how this is going to be received in scientific circles and legal circles. You even discussed that early in Dominion Lost, but you did it anyway. Why?
Well, I felt it was important for scientists to come forward. Now, to the best of my recollection, I think I'm the first scientist to go on the record with a first-person account of his UFO close encounters and interactions with humanoid alien beings. And, we're at the cusp of disclosure now, and my hope is that coming forward will encourage other scientists who have the same experiences as I've had. And I know they're out there. And doing that will encourage scientists who have not had these experiences to take this phenomenon seriously, because it means we will have validated the investigation of this phenomenon, because scientists like them are saying that the phenomenon is real. At least this is what I hope will happen.
Well, I guess you're probably holding your breath, waiting to see what happens and hoping that your prediction is true, that others do come forward and follow your examples. Has that happened yet? Are you getting feedback from colleagues?
No. Frankly, I wrote the book, and prior to writing the book, George, I haven't told anyone about my experiences. I haven't told any of my colleagues. I haven't told any of my family. The only person I've told is my wife. And so this is the point of me coming forward, and now I'll have to take the lumps as they come, but try to answer any questions that come at me as honestly and as directly as I can, and I'm ready for it.
I'd have to guess that your wife gave you a thumbs up. Go ahead and do it if that's what you want.
She's been very encouraging. She's supported me from the beginning, and I will forever appreciate that from her because, I don't want to go this completely alone. I needed to have someone behind me encouraging me all the way, which she has.
You acknowledge that when you first started kicking around this idea about coming forward a while back, you knew it would hurt your ability to, say, get papers or articles published, that science journals, which are, political animals, they can reject you for any number of personal or petty reasons. You're probably going to face that, aren't you?
Absolutely. Well, at the time I discovered this was right at the beginning of my career, and I just was actually shocked and stunned, as I reported in the book, at how everything that was apparently happening to purported abductees, everything that happened to them happened to me. But it was early in my career. I knew that all the scientists and all the doctors, physicians, clinicians reading grant proposals with my name attached to it would have heard about me if I'd reported this sooner. And I don't think I would have gotten a very good review at that point. But it's now much later than that. I'm established. I've gotten a lot of studies under my belt, and I feel it's important, George. We're at a time where a lot is going on in the UFO with the UFO phenomenon. We're seeing a lot of people in government that are close to saying things that amount to disclosure, but also, I want to stress that in addition to the UFOs that we want the government to admit are real, are somebody else's interplanetary space vehicles, I want to emphasize that we want to put proper focus on the fact that alien beings, non-human beings, are operating those spacecraft. And, that has to be part of disclosure too. And so I think whatever adverse consequences happen to me, which I don't think are going to be that bad at this point in my career, I think it's worth it for the good of our country and for the good of our species, frankly, that I do something to hasten, to contribute to the momentum for disclosure. And
there's
that's
so
why I
much.
wrote the book.
So much of the attention and the conversation right now is focused on the technology, the discussion about government disclosure, and whistleblowers coming forward, and why is this kept secret? It's all about military technology, the race to try to duplicate it, reverse engineer it, figure it out, build it ourselves. That's why there's national security involved.
Right.
All about the tech and how to figure it out. But not much attention anymore, at least not in the current discussion, about the central issue here, which is the direct encounters, the close encounters, the interaction between us and them, whoever they are. And I think you're right. I think that those should be flip-flopped, that the contact that has been happening and the communication that has happened is what should be the focus of this, because that's their focus, whoever they are.
I agree. And, I think that frankly, all the evidence, and there's just been an abundance of evidence from dozens of investigators that have uncovered literally thousands of abductees in this country alone. And they all tell essentially the same story. It's remarkable how strikingly consistent their accounts are, from abductee to abductee to abductee. And what has emerged from this, I don't want to let this evening go by without mentioning this. What's emerged from all of these accounts is that there has been a lot of evidence, a lot of good evidence, that aliens are interacting with human beings because there's been an experimental program. They've been experimenting on our species the way I have for many years, decades now. I've experimented as a biologist, on lower species. And the narrative is that the reason for this is that it appears that genetic material has been collected from the abductees and using something like in vitro fertilization techniques that we have, creating embryos, human embryos that are then genetically modified to create a new human species, what I call a transgenic human species, that look just like us, that are essentially Homo sapiens, but with some type of novel DNA, perhaps alien DNA, perhaps DNA that's never seen it, that has not been seen in nature yet. And now we hope, if you believe the ancient alien hypothesis, that program is being done for our benefit so that we can continue on our path of evolution. But we really don't know. We know that there's some agenda that the aliens have. We're not sure what that is. And for that reason, I think we need to study the aliens and everything we know about the aliens, all the evidence that's come forward from the military and from the private citizens, and have some attention on how to study alien biology and, if possible, what's going on with the transgenic human species, for which a lot of evidence suggests it are among us, are in our midst, covertly secreted throughout human society. And I think we need to address this, and not to take the focus away from the technology, because that's critical that we have access to technology with military applications, lest our adversaries beat us to the punch. But just as importantly, we need to have proper focus on the aliens. And I have some hope that will happen, but I think my book is one of the few books where scientists is coming out and saying that. So I feel that I'm doing what I can to promote disclosure. I just hope that other scientists are going to come forward and echo some of the things I'm saying in my book.
Well, I hope so, for your sake and for all of our sake, too. I mean, there are other scientists with your kind of credentials that have investigated this topic and have dug into abduction scenarios and the idea of a hybrid race and DNA experiments, all that. But nobody that I've ever heard of who's had a lifetime of those experiences coming from your field who's come forward to talk about it. I should point out, we're going to go to a break in about 2 minutes, but when we get into the discussion of what your happened to you in these very dramatic encounters, you're not recalling things because you underwent regressive hypnosis. You're recalling things from your own memory, right?
You're exactly right. That's correct.
That's
it's unusual. I'm not saying that never happens, but in my case, I had no regressive hypnosis. Everything I report has been recalled consciously.
This is just a speculative question here, but we'll hear the stories in a moment when we come back from the break. But I just wonder if you've thought that you ended up as a biologist as a way to study the nature of this phenomenon and what the interaction with the species are, whether it was some sort of a subtle push in that direction as a professional career so that you can figure it out. And I don't know if it's ever occurred to you before.
Possibly consciously, and at least unconsciously. I've frankly, since I've been 8 years old, I would read the newspapers and read of these reports of metallic flying saucers, and then I would read a few years later about the account of Betty and Barney Hill, the first reported abductees, and encounters with alien beings. And it had to be at the back of my mind, that their biology has to be so interesting and maybe similar, but also different than ours. And that would prompt some interesting questions that if I were a biologist, I might be able to grapple with and try to answer. So you're right. I think you're right about that.
My guest is Dr. Bruce Rapuano. His book is called Dominion Lost. I predict it's going to be make a big impact on this field as it filters out and people become aware of it and then start debating the contents. When we come back, we'll take you back to 1965, the first of several dramatic encounters that our guest had. All right, Bruce, let's jump into it. Take us back to 1965. How old are you? What's your family situation? Tell us the events that unfolded on the fateful night in question.
Well, I was 10 years old, and I'll tell you, we had a multiple witness UFO close encounter, frankly, like none I've ever heard of in my life. I can tell you a little bit about it. We're playing a ball game in the front yard of our home in the suburbs just outside of New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm standing at the edge of the driveway. For some reason, I look up to my right, and it looks like the sky is opening up above me. I see an immense, brilliant light, but it's partially obstructed by a large oak tree in the center of our front lawn. So I walk maybe 10, 15 yards toward our front door, where I get a nice, unobstructed look at this. And, it's a brilliant light, but it's not a point source of light like a helicopter, a plane, a star, or a planet. This light, with the configuration of the biblical Star of Bethlehem, is at least 2.5 times the size of the full moon. And it's almost too bright to look at. And, we're all gathering around where I'm standing. The game stopped, obviously, and we're staring at this for 10, maybe 15, 20 seconds, maybe half a minute at the most. And I noticed something strange. Before the UFO appeared, we could hear all the insects in the neighborhood. This was a couple of days before summer, and usually, that time of the year, the sound of the crickets and grasshoppers in the neighborhood is deafening. I couldn't hear anything, and I thought this is very unusual. I turned my head away from the UFO just for a second or two to see if I could detect any noise, any ambient noise from the animals or insects in the neighborhood. Nothing. Dead silence. I should point out that the UFO itself was silent and motionless. And then, if you want me to continue, I'll tell you more, because it gets stranger and stranger.
No. Yeah, we're here to hear the story.
And it escalates. So when I took that brief look to my left, away from the object, there was a classmate of mine that was in the game with us, taller fellow than I, blonde hair, don't remember his name. Well, he was standing still like a statue, literally frozen, not talking, not moving at all, which alarmed me a little. Now, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, all the rest of the crowd on my right side, they were not talking either. I couldn't detect any movement from them as well. And what I did was just look back at the object, and in not a matter of more than 5 seconds, I would say, the light turned off instantly, as if by a flip of a switch. It was startling how quickly this light went off. But in its place, I could see an object, completely different object. I can only describe it as a red fireball, maybe the size of a dime, held at arm's length, but now it was moving. And I just had to follow this. It was moving southwest, so I alone started walking toward our next door neighbor's property, their backyard, following this object as it was moving parallel to the earth, didn't change its altitude, speed, direction. And I stood in the center, I guess, of our next door neighbor's backyard. I watched it until it disappeared over the horizon. It took about 90 seconds. And then I walked back to our yard, where the rest of the group was still there, and we convened to kind of share notes and discuss what we had just seen. And now it gets even stranger, because apparently people in the group saw features of the UFO that I clearly didn't see, that were very different from what I had seen, telling me that either for some reason I lost consciousness or I wasn't present on the scene for a period of time. Now, there was one person in the group that may have provided a clue to answer the question I had in my mind. What happened to me? Why didn't I see what everyone else was seeing? She said to me all of a sudden, Bruce, where did you go? And I quickly explained to her, well, you must have seen me walk next door to get a better look at the UFOs that flew away from us. She said, oh, no, I saw you in your neighbor's yard. And she related to me how for a time I could not be seen either in our next door neighbor's yard or in our yard. And this, to me, has all the hallmarks of a classic UFO alien abduction. And, I have to say that if, as I mentioned before I related this experience, I've never heard another UFO encounter quite like it. But, I think I'm going to stop there in case you have any questions about this particular sighting and experience.
Well, you have conscious memories right up to the point where, you apparently were taken on board, right? Is that and you reconstruct?
Right. And here,
right.
Thank you. You just reminded me that a key takeaway for me from this particular incident is control. If in fact this is what happened, that I was taken aboard, it's mystifying to me, and I really want to know the answer to the question: how were these alien beings able to control human perception, state of consciousness, and memory, so that no one in the group knew where I went, and I didn't know where I went, nor did I have any memory at all of what happened? And this is going to be a theme, this theme of control that I'll bring up again and again as I talk about other experiences I've had, which gets me to the point of why I wrote the kind of book that I wrote. But I guess that's about as much as I wanted to say about that particular experience. Some people may not believe it was a classic UFO abduction, but I have other things to say and other experiences that I can relate that might shed more light on what really happened to me.
Well, let me ask you this: if I read this correctly, did you? Maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but did you reconstruct some of this? Check back with some of these kids who had now are adults, obviously, to see if they had similar memories, or did I misunderstand that part of the book?
Well, you're correct. I was remiss in not following up and trying to locate these individuals, but I'm confident that none of them had any inkling of what happened to me. None of them picked up on the conversation after that. One girl, one classmate of mine said, Bruce, where did you go? No one said anything. I don't think they had a clue whether I disappeared or not. But no, I've been remiss in not doing some investigative reporting and trying to seek out these people. I'm sure they would have remembered the UFO, but I don't know if they would have remembered too much more than that. This is something that I've thought about over the years on a regular basis ever since it happened. So this is why I can recollect so many details of it, whereas other people may have forgotten perhaps quite a bit of it.
Based on other events, other things that happen to you down the road, and conscious memories of what happens to you going forward, and then you thinking back on that night, you're pretty sure that there was something in the effect of lost time there, but also you discuss in a lot of abduction cases, in research that's been done and books that have been published, people talk about others who are there who are essentially turned off. In some of these classic scenarios, one member of a family is targeted, they get taken out of a home, and everyone else is basically turned off, like a switch is flipped, and they're immobilized for a time being. Do you think that's what happened to the other kids who were out there in the yard?
George, I think you're exactly right. I think that's what happened. My first clue was the fellow on my left who looked completely motionless, and the fact that all conversation and movement from the crowd simultaneously was absent at that time. And, I've had other experiences that I relate in the book where had family members have the same thing happen to them at the same time I had another episode of missing time. So this has been this having friends or loved ones being turned off. Unfortunately for them, when they're around me when I'm having these encounters, is something that happened a number of times.
These stories that we hear, about, when these ships show up, suddenly all the insects and birds and everything else, the sound stops. It's as if somebody just turned down the volume. Can you explain your idea on why that happens or why that phenomenon has been reported so commonly in these kinds of experiences?
Well, human beings can react to some of the energies that these UFOs put out that have very powerful electromagnetic fields that they generate, and that can certainly have an effect on human neurophysiology, and I'm sure it has some effect on the insects too. Now, that's the biologist's perspective. I don't know if there's something related to the energy field, whether it's an electromagnetic field of the UFO or a gravitational wave energy that causes some time distortion where our human perception is affected by the energies that are generated, the very powerful energies that are generated by these UFOs. And let me stress, the sighting I mentioned was certainly a close encounter. This object, this brilliantly lit object, appeared like it was just overhead, as if it were part of an airplane flying overhead. If you were at an airport, I don't know if you've ever been at an airport to watch the planes take off and land. So this was a legitimate close encounter that had to exert some effects on animal biology through whatever energy its propulsion system created.
Take us to the next event. The next event that happens to you that you have a conscious memory of.
Thank you, because it's a very logical progression. As I was saying, people may not believe that the first experience I related was a classic UFO abduction, and I have not undergone regressive hypnosis. But a few years before that, this was not a multiple witness experience. I was all alone. I was going to bed. It was actually, again, in the summertime, beautiful, cloudless day. I would say maybe 15 minutes before dusk. And I just put my head down on the bed. And I hadn't been in bed for more than a minute. Something out of the corner of my eye, I don't know if it was a flash of light or whatever it was, attracted my attention outside my bedroom window. I turned my head to the right and immediately saw, just 4 or 5 blocks away, flying right over the rooftops of our neighborhood, the strangest looking airplane I've ever seen in my life. I had never seen anything like that before. I had never seen anything like that before or since. Now, this airplane was strange in a number of ways. I thought I saw wings, but the fuselage looked too round or too fat. In other words, the diameter of the fuselage was a little bit too large compared to its length. It looked more circular than tubular, more like a UFO. The other strange thing I noticed about this, and again, it made no sound, was that there was some type of lightning strike at the tail, or electrostatic discharge. Now, ordinarily, I would have been utterly fascinated by this. And even at my young age of 6 years old, I looked at every airplane and helicopter, every object in the sky, and pointed it out to people. I would have been fascinated to look at this more. Instead, I did something that was very unexpected. As if I was told by one of my parents to go to sleep, I turned my head away from it, put my head down on the pillow, and immediately fell asleep. This is another example of what I call the control mechanism, where I feel that there's some capability the aliens have to make people do what they want them to do to control their mind in a number of ways, which I can get into later. So I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up, and when I woke up, I wasn't in my room anymore. Clearly, I was someplace else. I was still lying down, but I wasn't in my bed. I was on a table. It looked like, it felt like an operating room table in a hospital. It wasn't cold, but it felt like, certainly hard to the touch, like either steel or porcelain, but much larger relative to my childish body than I would have expected an operating table to be. And I detect, I don't know if I heard or just sensed some commotion in front of me, maybe 20, 25 feet from the foot of the operating room table, I'll call it. And I slowly sat up. And when I did, I looked and saw a hallway outside the room I was in. And in that hallway, I saw not one, not several, but dozens of small, 3.5 to 4 foot tall humanoid beings crowded in that hallway. And they were walking back and forth very quickly. But strangely, it looked as if they were either on a dolly or on a walkway like we have in airports that where people can take to get from terminal to terminal. There were dozens walking from left to right, dozens walking from right to left. For some reason, I'm assuming I'm in a hospital, and these are the strangest doctors I've ever seen. But I know they're not mine. And so with all the indignation I can muster, I point at them and I say, "Hey, you're not my doctors." And this is the one moment when I know this event was, although I say in the book it was a dreamlike experience, I know it was real because it was a moment of alertness. I was completely awake and active in the whole scene.
I'll tell you what, Bruce, Dr. Bruce Rapuano, we're going to have to take a break here. This story is getting good, and we're going to jump back into it right after this break.